Hey guys, it's Q&A Tuesday. This is going to be a bit of a stiff episode. This morning I woke up with the entire right side of my body a little bit stiff, so I apologize for any non-sudden movements. Apparently I found out today from my chiropractor that if your mattress is too hard, your body will react a certain way and your brain will send a message to your muscles for them to tense up and therefore make you stiff. So that's an argument I have to take up with my wife because she likes her mattress extremely firm, where I prefer my mattress a bit softer. So either we're gonna have to sleep in different bedrooms or something's gotta give because this whole stiffness thing is not working for me. Anyway, enough about that. Let's dive into some questions. First question comes from George Jace. Hey Roman, what do you think about Daytona Oysterflex, and can you do Basel World predictions? I can't do Basel World predictions, I'll tell you that much. In fact, I don't like doing predictions because what's the point of guessing? And by the time this video airs, Basel will probably have started and we'll see anything new that's coming out. So the Oysterflex Daytonas, you're referring to Daytonas that are on the strap. I want to talk about the latest models of white gold, rose gold, and yellow gold. It was Rolex's way to sort of cheapen the Daytona. Ian, if you can throw the retail price differences between the ones on a bracelet and the ones on a strap, you guys can clearly see where the difference comes in. The watch is lighter because it doesn't have the heavy gold bracelet that goes along with it. I feel like it makes the watch a lot more sporty, especially if you put it on a rubber strap. At the same token, you put it on a leather strap, it becomes a lot more dressier. You kind of get the best of both worlds out of the Oysterflex Daytona or Daytona on the strap. In terms of popularity, the ones on the strap are a lot less popular, or at least up until now were a lot less popular than those on the bracelets, and they were actually the worst sellers. I think I mentioned I have a P serial Daytona from Rolex in white gold, which they made very few of, and due to the fact that they were just not as popular as the ones on the bracelet. Rolex, for the most part, is known for their watches on bracelets. You know, you can ask 9 out of 10 watch collectors, and every single one of them could identify the different bracelets that Rolex has come on, which is the Oyster bracelet, the Jubilee bracelet, as well as the President bracelet, right? It's a fairly big identifier when it comes to Rolexes. So when you take a watch and you put it on a strap, all of a sudden it doesn't look like a regular Rolex, and that's a big no-no with an average consumer. Because what they buy, they want it to be known for what they buy. They want everybody to see, hey, that's a Rolex. And when you put a Rolex Daytona on a strap, it tends to not do so well. With the exception, current Rolex Oysterflexes, especially the white gold with sort of that white grayish dial, it pretty much trades at list right now. And the reason for that is, again, supply and demand. New stainless steel ceramic bezel, which I'll throw up there, added to the hype of the new Oysterflexes with the same ceramic bezels. But I think overall, it's got to be their best looking Oysterflex to date. If you compare it to some of the older models, and I throw them up there, it's just a better looking watch overall. So to answer your questions, I like the Daytona Oysterflexes, specifically the newer models or the newest models. I think it's a great look. I think it's a lot of good options, as I said, to be both sporty and dressy. And again, just something different, a breath of fresh air among all the other Rolexes that seemingly look the same. Hope that answers your question. Next question comes from EJ Trinidad, and I've answered this guy's questions multiple times at this point, and he keeps coming up with good ones. Hey Roman, great video yet again. Thank you, EJ. Great insight, thanks. Couple of questions. How often do you encounter shipping complications, i.e. watch got lost in transit or something? Is there insurance on it? Can imagine this can be a hassle, especially if it's a rare watch that gets lost. You mentioned you pick up watches from a rare like Indonesia, Tokyo, etc. How do you know which dealers from which parts of the world to call when looking for certain pieces? What's your cutoff when it comes to counting something as vintage, like an early 90s piece is already vintage? Thanks, hope you get to answer these. Very simple. As far as shipping complications arise all the time. Oftentimes, we ship upwards of 600-700 boxes a day here. We have a huge shipping department. Again, not all watches. We do sell jewelry and other things and accessories and a lot of cheaper items, and that's what tends to be the bulk of the shipment. But nevertheless, we do ship a lot of boxes on a daily basis. First and foremost, we have a process in place downstairs that's rock solid. I have a CLO, Chief Logistics Officer, that sits downstairs and oversees the entire process. But for the most part, FedEx, UPS, or anyone else for that matter, do not lose packages. Going on 17 years of business now, I've lost under 10 packages. But every single package that does leave here does come out fully insured for the value of that watch. Yes, it's terrible if a rare watch gets lost in transit. It's oftentimes difficult to redeliver that same watch to a client, but nevertheless, I am fully covered and fully insured. In the case something does get lost, we do get paid for the full value declared on that package. You mentioned you pick up watches from everywhere, like Indonesia, Tokyo. How do you know which dealers from which parts of the world to call when looking for certain pieces? Well, it's really a matter of knowing your vendors and dealers that you deal with. Often it's a two-way street. People I sell to, I'm aware of what inventory they have. And oftentimes my sales department will literally send a blast out to a few dealers that they know may carry a particular brand or specialize in certain things like high complications or jewelry watches, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really how we play it. It really comes from experience in dealing with a bunch of vendors all over the world. And because we do so many trade shows around the world, you know, as far as Hong Kong, you guys seen those videos, we often know just from experience who has what, you know. Just because we're at these trade shows, we're selling, we're also doing some buying, and we're often aware of which inventory lies with which dealer at any given time. It's a very small world if you consider, yes, there may be thousands of dealers out there, but the industry is a very, very niche industry and a very small industry, so it's not very hard to keep up with who has in stock. A lot of dealers have email lists that they blast out, a lot of dealers have WhatsApp groups, some dealers have wholesale websites. There's a lot of ways to make yourself aware of inventories with other dealers all over the world, really. And my cutoff for vintage, honestly, I think that 90s is already vintage. And really, it's not about the date. It's about really the company, how old the company may be. You know, because a lot of people will differentiate between antique and vintage, and I tend not to. You know, yes, granted, you know, pocket watches from the 1800s or ladies' wristwatches from the early 1900s could certainly be considered antique. But vintage to me is something that has the vintage look and appeal and collectability. That's kind of how I look at things. My A serial Royal Oak from 1972, which I'm wearing today again, is it something that's vintage or antique at this point? I mean, 28 plus 19, what, 47-year-old watch? Yeah, it's definitely a vintage. But then I also have Royal Oaks from you know, the 80s and some early 90s, which I consider vintage. So there's really no date for me to cut something off. It really depends on the watch, on the model, on the maker as well, because some companies are only 30 years old or only 20 years old. Does that mean their first stuff is vintage? Quick example, the Richard Mille 004 or 008, which was one of the first models that Richard Mille came up with. Again, they're not that old, but at the same token, in comparison to some of the modern stuff, to me, they're already vintage, you know, and that's really how I look at things. Hope that makes sense. Here's a good one from Miran. Hey Roman, love the content. Recently bought my first big boy watch, Rolex sub-date. Waited 9 months to hear back from an ID, so I call it my baby. Can you please share, compare, review watches in the 10 to 20K price range for some of us aspiring high rollers? I'm in my early 30s and I can't help but feel weird when someone notices my watch and gives me a "you've got more money than sense" look. Will I ever get used to walking around with a 10K watch on my wrist? And what's the best comeback to a condescending comment? Okay, so as far as comparing reviews, watches 10 to 20K price range, that's a very vague question, and I should probably do a what's on my desk on that. But the weird looks that you get, and "you've got more money than sense" look. You know, there's an old saying, and it's been a meme, and you've seen it all over Instagram and all over other social medias. If you don't understand the price of something, it's probably not for you. It sounds a bit snobby, but at the same token, it does answer your questions in a sense. For those that don't understand, don't need to understand sort of thing. And you didn't buy your watch to prove something to anyone. You bought your watch because, like you said, it's your baby. This is something you get joy out of. This is something that makes you feel good about yourself, good about what you're wearing, like any other materialistic thing, whether it be a fancy car, a fancy pair of shoes, or the latest and the greatest jacket from Louis Vuitton. It makes no difference. And whether it's a watch or a Louis Vuitton jacket or a fancy car, you're always going to get those looks. And for the most part, you're going to get it from those that are jealous. And the only way to deal with jealousy, at least from my personal perspective, is to simply ignore it. Do you want to have a comeback to a condescending comment? It depends on how sharp you are. Usually, I'll come back to people with something smart, but for the most part, I'll just ignore them. I'll politely smile and say, well, it is what it is. Or oftentimes, you know, when people make comments about my watch, especially where I wear a diamond encrusted watch, is something that's really, really flashy, and they'll make some sort of a comment. I'll turn around, look in their face, and say, "Hey, do you know the make and model of this watch? You know, do you know how much it costs?" Because 9 out of 10 times they won't. And when you hear them stumbling, going, I'm like, so why are you making fun of it? How do you know this is not a $5 watch? What makes you assume that this is a super expensive watch? How do you know these diamonds are even real? You know what I mean? I've led people to believe that I wore a fake watch in the past just for shits and giggles, to be honest with you, and sort of have fun with it. But for the most part, I brush these type of comments off. and ignore, change the topic, or just go on about my business and, and let it go in one ear and out the other, so to speak. That's really my best way of approaching it, and I'm sure you can do the same. Hope that answers your question. Let's take one more and get out of here. Next question is from Terry C. Hey, Roman, another cool episode. Thank you. I just thought of a question for you. Does anyone make a watch with a date complication in Roman numerals? Do you think it's feasible to achieve such a thing in a mechanical watch? Real quick, it is feasible, but I'm not sure how practical it is. If you consider date wheels on a watch, your standard date wheel is just a wheel inside the watch that turns, and it's like a disc with 1 through 31, and as that disc turns, the date displays on a window somewhere, right? Now, independent watchmakers and other watchmakers have come up with very creative and cool ways to display dates in different formats. Then you have, let's say, a Langenson that sort of shows the date in what looks like a digital displays, and all that is 3 wheels, where you have 1, 2, 3 on the one wheel, and then you have 0 through 9 on the other wheel, and as those 2 wheels turns, they make a combination of a date. So let's assume I wanted to do Roman numerals. If we take the single wheel approach, as you can imagine, you get into the higher dates. For example, let's say the 28th. The 28th would be, let's see if I remember my Roman numerals, X, X, V, and 3 I's, right? That's going to make 28, which makes it for a pretty long date. So it would have to be a pretty significantly big wheel in order to display those type of dates, and it would have to be a pretty big display one in order to show, but nevertheless, you could still do it. With 2 wheels, it would be the same thing. It would have a combination of Roman numerals on the one wheel, again, 1 through 3. But again, it's not really 1 through 3 because remember, Roman numerals, 10 is an X, 30 would be 3 X's, right? So the 31st would be 3 X's and an I. So really you would have to have one wheel that has an X, well, that has a blank for 1, then that has an X, 2 X's, and 3 X's, right? And then again, that wheel would turn, and in turn it would match up with all the Roman numeral numbers, and the biggest one would be 8, which would be a V and 3 I's, a 9 would be an X and an I before it. Those wheels would get much bigger, much more cumbersome to deal with, and the display windows would have to be huge. Is it still feasible? Of course it is. I think the best way, if I were to do Roman numerals, is I would do it in a cylinder display, and you can see those type of things in them with True to Temps watches, where they have the cylinders on the bottom. They show the calendar, the month, I believe they show. I think Jacob & Co. did a cylindrical display or watch. I'll throw that up there as well. But to answer your question, it can be done. The reason it hasn't been done is, again, it's not very practical and probably make the watch a lot bulkier. Ask 10 people of how familiar they are with Roman numerals when you get into numbers like 28, 27, or 29. It's just not something that's being used so often, much like, let's say, the Latin language, which people still study, but yet there's no use for it for the most part in the real world. Hope that answers your question. Well, guys, that's it for me for today. I hope you enjoy yet another episode of Q&A Tuesday. I hope I've answered some of your questions. I will do my best to try to get the rest of your questions. As always, comment below with new questions to make these episodes possible. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday.